Okay, well, welcome to Roots of Reality Experiences. Today I'm joined by Jeremy Daum, who is a senior research scholar in law and senior fellow at Yale University's Paul Tsai China Center. Jeremy has more than a decade of experience working in China on collaborative legal reform projects. His principal research focuses on criminal procedure law with a particular emphasis on the protection of vulnerable populations such as juveniles and the mentally ill in the criminal justice system. Additionally, he's also an authority on China's social credit system and is the founder and contributing editor of the collaborative translation and commentary site ChinaLawTranslate.com, dedicated to improving mutual understanding between legal professionals in China and abroad. So Jeremy, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
So how did you first get interested in Chinese law?
Ooh, that's a good question. I had been to China and Taiwan before I went to law school. And
Okay.
so I had that passion for the region and the language in particular. But I was in Taiwan in the year 2000, at the turn of the millennium, and there was great civic pride in the elections then, and having a real free democratic election for really the first time.
Yeah.
And people were asking me questions about our legal system and our government's form, which I knew painfully little about. And so when I went back home and was considering going to grad schools, I looked at law school as a serious option, did that, but then I had a hankering for the China stuff. And mercifully, I was a beneficiary of Jerome Cohen at NYU Law, who gave me a position working in his center, doing collaborative legal reform projects and research on Chinese law. So I was able to combine those two interests of being a lawyer in the US and getting to pursue Chinese language and Chinese culture and really working in one of the most dynamic legal systems in the world over in China. And I switched to Yale when I wanted to live in Beijing, and they had an opportunity there to head their operations on the ground there, where I've been for, wow, close to 10 years, except for the last 2 due to COVID.
Wow, okay. Yeah. So a lot of interesting experiences then. So I guess, when a lot of people think about China in the modern sense, I guess a lot of people thinking about sort of the censorship that goes on in the country. How ingrained is censorship into Chinese law?
Yeah, I mean, censorship has a legal basis in China, but more importantly, it's a fact of life there. People are aware of their lack of access to foreign sites. A new app getting blocked from overseas or a new website getting taken away, is not that uncommon. And people sort of take it like the weather. It's something that just happens.
Right.
People who've been overseas and lived overseas and are used to having access can often find a VPN. They tend to be the sophisticated actors who studied abroad or whatnot. But for most people, I think the only misconception is people aren't really chomping at the bit to get this information and feeling deprived of it. A huge number of people can't access things because of language barrier overseas, so the English language alone or other languages in foreign websites is a problem. But more importantly, China's developed its own intranet at this point that really offers people the things that they're most concerned about by and large. Yes, there's distrust of government news sources sometimes, and people do translate foreign articles and put them on the local web. Sometimes they're deleted, sometimes they're not. But it's certainly something that people expect.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I guess imagine that there's a lot of people that don't really care either if there's censorship. They're ingrained in their own worlds, and they're like, okay, well, I mean, there's a lot of Americans, for example, that don't pay any attention to what goes on outside of their communities, or so I guess it just depends on the person.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff of life tends to not be censored. China is increasingly regulating even stuff that we would consider sort of stuff of life, like celebrity gossip.
Oh, okay.
And trying to limit a culture of celebrity, limiting children appearing online and shows. So they are getting further into regulating that type of content. But generally speaking, the day-to-day stuff that people are interested in is still online and is local. It isn't something you would go abroad for.
Yeah. Interesting. So I guess when it comes to like so I guess the concern then is just celebrities developing these kind of cult followings, and for the Chinese government, that's disturbing, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. So they've recently adopted this new model, calling it the online information ecosystem. I like to call it the ecosystem, because I can't resist puns. But what they've done is they've expanded beyond the formerly censored content, which was illegal content, where there's actually a law saying you mustn't, state secrets, things like advocating separatism of Taiwan, inciting ethnic hatred or ethnic separatism, promoting cults, trying to disrupt, spreading false information. So that stuff was illegal and is already banned, by either criminal law or regulations. But they now are also trying to ban what they're calling negative information, just stuff that has a bad impact on society. Things like making fun of a tragedy, like the recent plane crash. There were a few people who were disciplined for that. Showing too much sexual innuendo, too much gore, or even simulated gore, just stuff that they think is sort of sets a bad tone for the internet. And it's interesting because I've compared it in the past when you read these very vague descriptions of the banned categories, and especially these negative categories. It feels sort of like a school board trying to make a student code of content. Like, just don't say the bad stuff, just don't do the bad things. Yeah. And wouldn't we all like to wave a wand and just say no more bad stuff on the internet? Right. The problem is, one person's bad stuff isn't necessarily another's. And here the government is, of course, setting itself in the position of a parent monitoring for a child and limiting what information can get out there. And, we always talk with freedom of speech and law that there's two sides of it. There's the right to speak, and then also the right to receive the information. And both of those harms get done here by making it overly excessive in what information is getting banned. But the celebrity, the Chinese government tends to be very concerned about alternative sources of authority and power getting set up. Sure. And celebrity, it's someone who gets a following and has a big amount of influence, starts to be problematic, especially when it's influence perhaps out of their lane. They're famous for one thing, and then they're suddenly having a voice in all these other issues. And we certainly in the US, that's a problem we have. Some might say we've had celebrity presidents, but they're going ahead and cutting it, nipping it in the bud. And they even have rules now about things like the children of celebrities becoming celebrities by virtue of that association, and they limit, like, game shows shouldn't host, or reality shows shouldn't host the children of celebrities. Okay. They have to, they should have their own merit and be famous only for what they do well, not as a generalized celebrity. Interesting. I guess a no Kardashian rule, I guess. Yeah, so try to get rid of nepotism in the celebrity world, and which is certainly an issue. So I'm sure a lot of people around the world would see, like, that's a problem in a lot of different countries. But of course, the government regulation of it is what concerns people, since that's a game that can take many different formats over time. Interesting. And so how strongly would you say it is enforced in society? Like, when it comes to censoring things, if someone were to just post something online, would they immediately be found to do that? Or is it kind of like, they don't really have a way of catching every single negative post they don't want to see? How's that work? Well, in terms of taking down individuals' posts, there's a few things to consider. The first is that they actually do have rules that it's based on how many times it's been forwarded, you can get in more trouble. Oh, okay. So basically, it can be a very de minimis thing and no one will care, but they're
Yeah.
worried about impact and disruption of order in society. So they have rules that certain offenses, certain criminal offenses can apply if your post that was illegal gets forwarded, I think it's 500 times or, something like that. I'd have to check the rule. But beyond that, they sort of outsource the censorship. China loves hierarchical structures, top down, with the lower levels doing the implementation and being overseen both laterally by other departments and upwards by higher ranking departments. But what they've done here is they've made it so that the platforms have responsibility. So basically, it's like if we had a law saying that Google and Facebook have to be constantly monitoring the content, Twitter, and whatnot, have to be looking at the content, and they have to take certain actions if they see illegal or negative content online. And then even more so, they have things where in a chat group, a personal chat group, the person who created the chat group, like on WeChat there or here, it would be WhatsApp or whatnot, that person has responsibility for monitoring the content of the other people in the chat group.
Ooh, interesting. Okay.
Now, how enforced is that? I know situations where it's been enforced, but is it always going to be enforced? No. Often with Chinese regulation, especially administrative punishment and criminal law, I tend to say, it's not a problem until it is. And that's the thing. The law is there should they want to make it an issue.
Yeah.
Certain things have been cracked down on more rigorously than others, and there's occasionally special actions for things. For example, making fun of historical martyrs for the communist cause, the socialist cause.
Yeah.
People have been punished for that. Making fun of the Nanjing massacre, that has gotten some people punished. So that's something that they're interested in. And of course, if you go after the current leadership, you're likely to find trouble.
Yeah. So if someone were, obviously it makes total sense that there's kind of different levels of insults that the government would perceive. If you're talking about, I guess, celebrities and how great they are or something like that, they might not get you in trouble or something. But if you were to say, like, make fun of the president of China, so if someone were to make just like one post making fun of the president of China there, would that get flagged, or would it take you like to have a certain number of followers and a certain number of likes or shares or something?
For making fun of Xi Jinping, you can get it picked up pretty quick, but they're likely to just delete the post. Not have you get in trouble. It just won't be visible. Sometimes even in a one-to-one instant messenger chat with somebody,
really,
you can see they don't get your post because there's some of it's automated, and certain keywords get picked up.
Interesting.
And different things, things like the celebrity intrigue, culture of celebrity ban, they're more likely to do it in slightly more nuanced ways than stopping individual users from talking about celebrity. They'll probably put a ban on reality shows that over glamorize the competition element and things like this, or stop tipping too much online, regulating the tipping of online performers. They keep putting out new rules about live streamers and webcasting to stop this culture from getting out of hand.
Right.
They call it the chaos in fan circles, or chaos in fandom, that they're trying to rectify. Every country is reeling from the cultural impact of the internet still, and the mobile internet in particular. And China's doing it in its way.
Yeah. Interesting. So I guess when thinking about like I guess another kind of fairly somewhat well-known thing about China when it comes to like internet censorship is I guess what some people call the Great Firewall. So how exactly did that come about, and what was the goal behind it? And is there like efforts to continuously reform and expand it, or what's the dynamic there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a super expert on the technical side of things.
Right.
And there are people who can tell you about the inventor of it who is out there and the way that it blocks.
Yeah.
It for a while functioned without a real solid legal basis. But now they are putting it into laws that, foreign information can be blocked if it violates local rules.
Okay.
And that does now appear in regulations. But what gets in it, what gets not, my own website, China Law Translate, gets blocked in China.
Oh, okay.
And at first I used to think it was kind of funny because, it really is primarily translations of the laws of
Right.
China. But it's some of our commentary is the problem.
Yeah.
And it's a shame, but it is blocked, and a lot of content gets sort of semi-blocked where you can get through sometimes, but it's unstable. And then there's things that are fully blocked, including Twitter, Facebook, now Google after they made their exit.
Interesting. Okay. So, with your work in China, remind me, are you teaching classes in China, or are you just doing research? Or
so yeah, I do pure research sometimes, and I also engage with a lot of practitioners in China.
Okay.
I'm not allowed to practice law in China. Foreigners aren't, but
Yeah.
I've worked with a lot of government actors, including judges, lawyers, social workers, prosecutors, police,
Yeah.
to talk about US law to them and how we do things on a very practical level. Because like I said at the beginning, China's legal system is really dynamic. It changed, law is an inherently conservative institution. It's about preserving. And theirs changes way faster, in large part because the modern legal system has essentially been built since 1979. That's when law schools reopened and they reissued the major laws and sort of started to work towards having a functioning legal system again. And when, that's not a lot of history in terms of a legal system.
Right.
So
right.
They've really been breakneck speed adding to it, covering, making sure they have law in every aspect of life and trying to keep up with new technology like we've been talking about.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have had a regulation about live streaming even 15 years ago,
Right. That's true. That's true. Yeah. The technology has been changing so fast. The legal game to catch up to that technology is, I'm sure, a tough task.
A struggle everywhere. And we're a common law system in the US, so we do it, a lot of it through case law with and our Congress isn't terribly efficient at putting new laws out. But China sees these and they have the department in charge of the relevant area and they put out rules and they can change them quickly. So they have been working at a faster pace in addressing some of these things.
It's interesting though that, because you work with all those people in China, yet your website's blocked. It just kind of seems like kind of a funny dynamic.
Yeah, it's a shame. I was actually invited once, translation sort of the side hobby, and I was invited by a central government authority to talk about translation because they were trying to up their translation quality for their own laws, and they knew there were some foreigners that were already doing stuff, so they invited us and a lot of professors from around China. And people kept saying, oh, there used to be this good site called China Law Translate, and now we can't get to it. And I was like, oh, that would be me. And they're like, yeah, well, why can't we access your site? And I said, well, you'll need to ask the relevant departments. But it's not on my end. But there was interest there. People in China, Chinese legal professionals were looking at my site for learning how to best communicate some of the Chinese concepts to foreigners, and how to translate and tell the story of their legal system better. So it is a shame it was blocked, but yeah, I was never approached or criticized for the articles. They just took the website down.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Well, it's a kind of a fun fact that I guess to bring up.
Yeah, what are you going to do? I certainly didn't want to censor myself.
Well, yeah, of course. No.
People do sort of get in the habit of self-censorship, I think, when you're living in a regime like that. But it defeated the purpose for me to not have a voice. And I was told by a few friends, law professor types, that I really should have had two separate sites, one for translations and one for my articles, so then it wouldn't get blocked. And that defeats the purpose, you know?
Right. Well, yeah, then it's just like, putting on two faces kind of, yeah.
And I certainly don't want to be sending a different message. And I mean, I tend to think my writing is pretty objective and fair.
Sure.
So I don't think that it should have caused offense, but it did.
Yeah, that's life, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't know whose decision it was.
Right. So a lot of your, work, I guess, focused on like juveniles. And so I think about, because typically in societies, teenagers or people just of college age even are the ones that can kind of be rambunctious on the internet and post things that, may not be the most appropriate for a lot of adults, especially in countries with very strict censorship rules. What do like teenagers or college age people in China think about censorship, and do they take it seriously?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people, and not just in that age group, who are frustrated by censorship. And I think if you were to ask people, would you rather things be uncensored? They'd say, sure, and some of the cases of punishing people for comments get the public opinion against them. The public is like, that doesn't make sense. He shouldn't be punished for that. It was a silly thing, blah, blah, blah. I think, though, there's also a surprisingly large number of people who think there have to be some limits on speech, and that think that there should be some regulation to maintain order, especially in the category that we now call fake news. And people are worried about disinformation and creating sort of a turmoil through spreading false information. Interestingly, I should say the term fake news, I was just looking at this the other day, it predates Trump in China.
Interesting.
I was able to find at least as far back as 2000, where it's in law, using literally 假新闻, fake news as a phrase. False information has also been there even longer, but spreading fake information has been one of the things, and some of the public is more likely to support that. Rumor, they love to talk about rumor mongering and control. With kids, one of the interesting themes is that censorship happens in the name of fighting internet addiction. And I don't know if you've seen anything about some of the new rules about online gaming.
Yes.
Yeah, where they've gradually increased the limits on gaming, first making it in an actual statute for a few hours a week, but now we're down to it's 1 hour per day on the weekend and holidays, and it's not just any hour total, it's a specific hour where all children are allowed to play. So they're very serious about that, to the dismay of the video game industry. But it is, it shows you how when they want to shut something down completely, they really can. But the interesting thing with that is that in addition to it being about video games and about content appropriate for minors, they then have to know who is a minor. Right. And this is where you get into that inclusivity problem, where suddenly they're putting out rules about online entertainment and performances, and they're saying you should use algorithms to try and detect who is a child. And well, you can't do that without also trying to analyze everybody's information. And there may be some of your listeners who think that sort of thing is normal in China. Everyone's always getting algorithmically. Actually, their use of tech is usually pretty vague, especially mention of it in laws. This is a really specific thing, is to be looking for patterns that indicate a minor. China also features a real name registration system, where to use most online services, including social media sites and especially games, you have to register with your national ID card for your account. And the provider, again, has to verify that and has a responsibility for that. But, kids are kids and they'll borrow people's accounts.
Yep.
And I think recent rules have made it so that you're not allowed to offer guest modes or, trial modes on games, lest kids be using that to play the intro level again and again.
Interesting. Okay. And so I guess, when you think about censorship in China, then overall, do you think it has the effect the government wants at helping dictate opinions in society about issues and everything else? Or was it kind of hit or miss?
I mean, they certainly have missteps. It's a lot more sophisticated than one might think. When we think of censorship, we sort of think of like an article cut out of a newspaper, so you've got a hole in the paper.
Right.
And it's a lot more sophisticated than that, and not just because of technology, but because of understanding about public opinion.
Yeah.
And censorship is part of the larger program of guiding public opinion. And part of that is simply giving people authoritative sources of information, making sure that all news sites are getting their information from the central news sites.
Right.
They can rewrite if they want, but you're also allowed to reprint directly and link back. And they want to make sure that they know who is being a news creator and a news gatherer out there, and which in the age of social media is hard. So they've gotten more sophisticated about it. I remember one story that I frequently come back to, where a judge, a normal low-level court judge, was murdered. And she was shot with a gun, which is particularly unusual in China, where guns are not as common as they are in our country. But public opinion, as measured by discussion on social media, went high with interest in this topic. A judge got murdered. They thought someone was taking down the courts, someone was attacking the government. And then they blocked it. And they blocked the discussion of the story. And then there was another peak related to the story discussing, well, they blocked it. It must be serious.
Yeah.
And so the government wrote out on the Legal Daily, the law newspaper in China, on their website. They had a lovely article discussing how they could have better managed public opinion on this, because they created sort of a Streisand effect where people got more interested because they blocked it. And so they were like, the best thing to do is, when there's something that the public is very interested in, this as quickly as possible, give an authoritative statement about what it is. And that sort of resolves it, and things will go away more quickly sometimes if you don't aggressively block it. Now, some things are going to get aggressively blocked no matter what, because they're simply unacceptable. I'm not in China now, but I have been monitoring the news, and I have to say, the Ukraine war is not heavily covered there. When it is covered, it's following a party line as well, but most apparent is simply its absence. It's not non-existent, but it is not the level of story that it is here, while it's clearly of importance to China as a nation. I understand that the US and Western Europe are probably more focused on it than much of the world. But I think in China, you can see clearly this censorship. And we should talk in terms of whether it's achieving the desired effects. We should talk about the other side of it, which is not just blocking unwanted messages, but making sure the correct messages get through.
Right. Yeah.
And this, like I said, they're getting more sophisticated and better with it. And there's a few angles on it that are worth discussing. One of them is that same document on managing the ecosystem, the online content ecosystem. Not only does it have illegal and negative content, but it also has positive content.
Oh, okay. There you go.
And it's stuff that we'd like to see you spreading more of. And if you're a content creator, you're not probably going to be overly motivated by this unless you're a for-profit content creator, in which case you might want some government goodwill. But it's things that, spread the party's policies, things that explain party doctrine, spreading the core socialist values, which is a ubiquitous morality campaign launched by the government. Increasing China's international influence, be the soft power generation. So they want you to spread these things. And that's amongst the normal content producers. Within the government, every department has it. And so in my legal circle, the way it is that everybody has the duty, anyone who enforces the law has the duty to teach the law, and publicize the law. And so you'll see things like when a new law comes out, suddenly there'll be a case of public interest about that, involving that law. And it does work. I was just reading recently that there was a sensational case about a woman who seemingly mentally ill, definitely a victim of trafficking, who was found chained up in rural China, literally in chains. Wow. And it got a lot of attention. It was found by a video blogger. The situation was found, and the public was up in arms about certain things in the law. And I remember my first thought in seeing it was, I don't remember any laws on trafficking coming out recently. This is odd that someone's publicizing this, because I'm so cynical with it that whenever I see a news story like that, my first thought is, oh, they must be publicizing some new measure to stop this. They must be publicizing something. And if that was what happened here, it got out of hand because the public got too upset about it. But all of the measures that have been introduced in response to public opinion here are actually ones that had been in an action plan on fighting human trafficking that was released, 6 months to a year before this event happened. Now, does that mean that it's all staged, or, that they allowed it? No, but it means that they're always looking for something to allow it to gain momentum. Right. When it coincides with this agenda. So it's not necessarily negative, but it doesn't build consensus on certain issues. I think sometimes it often does. And the hard part is for them reeling with the situations where it doesn't. And that would be a great case study, that example, because the local authorities, when it first broke, that story of the woman in chains, issued some terrible statements that were very confusing and mutually contradictory, and it got the public more and more upset. Wow. And then the provincial level authorities stepped in and started giving much more detailed information to the public, trying to undo that harm, trying to follow that strategy I mentioned with the judge case of giving an authoritative statement to satisfy the public need for information, showing that they were responding. While not everyone supports the local government in China, certainly as long as the government is giving them a fairly decent quality of life, most people are gonna at least not be up in arms. Right. And the government is generally trying to provide stability and services to its people. The difference is that they see themselves as in a situation of deciding what needs to be done to achieve that stability, including blocking information and promoting information. But generally speaking, they're trying to satisfy the public. And if a story like this organically gets out of control, they might accelerate legal reforms that were in the works and things like this as responsiveness to public opinion. So there is a responsiveness to public opinion, and certainly the monitoring of social media is not just for censorship. It's to understand what the public wants and needs, as well as what problems are developing.
Yeah, well, I imagine, the studying the population is important for the regime, to stay in power and to stay functional and successful. So if you don't know what people are thinking, then you're in trouble, because I guess the sort of the information battle is key to protecting the party in power. So.
Of course, it's about maintaining the status quo. And I think that the people there who think about this think that if they're doing it right, it's not even a battle. Because they're building consensus. They're trying to make it so that everyone feels satisfied except for a few outliers who are going to be examples.
Right.
And unfortunately, that group is larger than it should be by a lot, and often includes lawyers. But there are, they even have made special speech rules for lawyers talking outside of court and inside court.
Jeez,
but yeah, lawyers aren't supposed to opine generally about cases. Lawyers aren't supposed to comment about the legal system critically generally. And this, again, we talk about the right to speak, but also the right to receive the message. Well, the lawyers are also the legal experts, and we're losing something if you can't let them advocate.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's interesting to see how that plays out. Now, you made an interesting point, which I think is something I'm seeing more and more of around the world, where sort of you kind of hinted at, the government, kind of working with influencers on social media to sort of promote party lines. I'm seeing this a lot in Russian media, where, they're talking about the government lines about the war in Ukraine, and having influencers sort of parrot those same lines. How common is that in China, and how does this shape sort of the future of censorship in China? Sort of connecting social media more with the government narrative.
Yeah, I think China's goal at this point is to make it so that the influencers stay in their lane. And that's part of that war on celebrity culture, is that they're trying to make it so that people shouldn't have a big voice on issues outside of their expertise. So rather than going to the general influencers and saying, would you promote this good thing, that, the core socialist values or the party policy, that information is encouraged for all users to spread. But I think that they're really trying to just minimize the influence that these people should have outside of their activities. So there's more and more regulation of the big V's, they call them the influencer accounts, and there's special rules for responsibility of content for people who have accounts with huge numbers of followers and have that kind of impact. So they're aware of it and regulating it from a slightly different direction. I'm probably not because I'm out of the country, but rather because I'm old. I'm not aware of who the current biggest influencers are and whether they're being incorporated into promoting some of this, some of the core socialist value type propaganda campaigns, but it wouldn't be surprising.
Yeah. Now, another aspect of your work is like the social credit system that about. What exactly is that? I know that we've discussed before that this is it's kind of an exaggerated thing abroad in terms of Western media. People kind of don't quite understand it, I guess, in terms of how it actually functions. But yeah, describe what that is and how it actually works.
Yeah, people grossly misunderstand that. Talk about misinformation. I think that social credit story will ultimately be one as a textbook example of misinformation. It's so the reality of social credit is so different from most Americans' understanding of it, that when I explain to people what it really is, they say, so you're saying there is no social credit system? And it's like, no, I'm saying there is a social credit system, but it's not the thing you're talking about. And the thing that people are talking about is sort of an algorithmically run real-time monitoring of all your data and metadata from your online footprint to rank you or rate you as a citizen, and giving certain perks to people with good scores and penalties for people with negative scores. And that just doesn't exist. That there are some local pilots that have had little scoring systems but the information that can be included in them is very, very constrained, almost always to information gathered or created by government entities. So things like whether you got parking tickets, violations of law, and those score systems are not the majority of the system. I call those part of the ethics, publicity, and education campaign, because they don't really have teeth. The penalties that you can get are for breaking the law, but I assure you the direct penalties you get for breaking that law will be worse than anything from a social credit record of it. What the system actually is about centralizing regulatory data. And it's mainly aimed at businesses, not individuals.
Yeah.
And so what happens is when a regulatory agency gives a company a fine or fails them on an inspection, that becomes more public than it previously was. So you can look them up and you can see that they've had this. In extreme cases, people get blacklisted if they've had serious violations of law. And again, it's always a violation of law. But a serious violation of law that includes something like a threat to public health and safety, things like that, can get you blacklisted. And the real innovation of social credit isn't about scoring so much, but is that other administrative agencies will take action against somebody put on a blacklist by any other agency. Now, it's not ubiquitous. I mean, it's not universal. They will. They've signed MOUs saying what action they will and won't take for each agency's blacklist. So mainly the action they'll take is constrained simply because they don't have much authority to do things to people outside of their jurisdiction. So it tends to be in discretionary areas. Things like if you apply for a permit to build something, but you have a food safety violation, I could say, looks like you're not a guy who follows the law. I might not give you this permit.
Right.
And it's always in these discretionary areas where it's a factor. And some Chinese law professors have said that even that's inappropriate because there's no legal basis for considering a food safety violation in a securities permitting situation or a construction permit. But these more serious offenses that do affect individuals include things like banning you from a field or a profession. Okay. So if you were the CEO or the actual controller, a supervising board member or something of that food producer that produced seriously dangerous food and got a penalty, you might not be able to start a new food service company later. And there are now, a recent development is that there are now grades for companies under the social credit system, but far from being a real-time metadata analysis.
Right.
So it's based on your regulatory compliance, and it's a 5-point scale. It's essentially excellent, good, fair, poor, unsatisfactory. It's nothing that doesn't exist in other regulatory systems. The unique part is that cross-departmental thing. And we've heard a lot of stories in the US about some of these more exotic penalties, things like you're banned from flying on airplanes.
Right, yes, yeah.
All of that actually applies to something that's a real exception in the social credit system, which is the court judgment defaulter list. China for years has had a problem enforcing court judgments, which has undermined the credibility of the courts. So say you sued me and you won, you might not be able to get that money, even with your court judgment, just because the courts didn't have adequate ways of enforcing it against me. Okay. So what the court judgment defaulter list is that if you have a judgment against you, the ability to satisfy it, but refuse to do so, the courts can apply some powers to limit you from doing a huge amount of spending activities.
Oh, okay.
And it's really only the courts that do that. And that one blacklist is very different. Now, an administrative fine can become a court judgment, because if the administrative agency can't get you to pay your fine, they'll go to the court and get a judgment. But again, this is so different. we can argue whether this is a good system or not. I don't think it's a good system. I think it has a lot of problems,
Right.
but it's so different from what most people are interested in when they hear social credit.
Yes, yeah.
They're thinking about this individual rating system. They're thinking about that Black Mirror episode,
Yeah, like
Nosedive.
some science fiction, type of thing.
Yeah, and it's just not that. And right, we tend to think of sort of like if Facebook was your government, right? Using all that data analytic technology to assign you your place in society. And it just isn't that. Nor would that really work very well, I don't think.
I feel like it would be very complex to be able to run something like that. It would be so complicated. You'd almost need like some sort of artificial intelligence or something to have a program that could run itself like that.
Yeah, and I mean, in a compartmentalized way through corporations rather than our government, we are living in that reality.
Yeah.
You're getting advertisements and loan offers and things based on information you didn't always realize you were sharing. And protection of personal information is a real thing. And harvesting of information by governments or corporations is a real thing. But it is not what social credit is. And as I like to say, am I saying that the Chinese government doesn't surveil people and keep tabs? Oh, sure they do. Different departments do in different ways. The police certainly do for certain people who've been identified as troublemakers. Yeah. China is very good at keeping tabs on people once that person has sort of come into the spotlight for them. And then I would assume that the police have access to any information they think is necessary. But that's still, again, something very different than a universal score system for ranking your citizenship or something like this.
Yes, that would be,
yeah. And I don't think that's likely to happen. I also don't think it would be terribly useful. Many different scores in different areas might make some level of sense. But a universal score actually loses a lot of its functionality because it doesn't give you specific information about the person.
Yeah, interesting. So is there anything that's like sort of being discussed in the Chinese government, which could be like a kind of a new way of sort of controlling aspects of society that is kind of like on the up and coming that you're aware of? Or
yeah, I mean, like I said, it's such a dynamic system. Things are always evolving. There's been big changes with minors, juveniles lately, in terms of content regulation and the idea of making sure that all content that's inappropriate for minors only appears in certain places. It's an odd mix of incredibly vague topic censorship and very specific regulation of minutia, like those video game rules of a specific hour on weekend days. Things like if you're reporting on crime by juveniles, in order to protect the kids, it can never be on the homepage. It has to be further back in, even if it's a legitimate story, just so as not to sensationalize it. That level of micromanagement sometimes, whereas other times it's things like the general rule about limiting placement of content that is harmful or physically or psychologically harmful to minors. And what does that mean? And some of the things on it are like encouraging a culture of despair amongst teenagers. Having been a teenager at one point in my life, I can't think of something that wouldn't inspire a culture of despair in that age group. But some of the new stuff is about regulation of algorithmic push services, where the algorithm selects content. China has actually, I would say, been ahead of the US in regulating commercial entities' use of data. So you have, but that includes things like for minors, making sure that the algorithm never pushes unsuitable content to them. They even mentioned in a recent document stopping what was called ElsaGate content in the US. I don't know if you're familiar.
No, what is that?
It was a bizarre sort of content generation for the purpose of milking YouTube largely's algorithm. So it would combine popular cartoon characters with some really bizarre content. So you ended up with things like Elsa performing tooth surgery on Papa, I mean, nonsensical stuff.
Right.
But it would get looped into kids' feed, even on their kid channel. Because of the cartoon characters. And it would, if you leave a kid on autoplay in front of YouTube, which apparently does happen, they would get this inappropriate. So they even mentioned, no using distorted cartoon characters doing things. And it's not just anti-pornography, it's anti-bizarreness, and things that would hurt kids. But it's also, making sure that adults have the right to opt out of any algorithmic push services. If you're getting personalized content delivery, they must provide you with an opt-out. They also have rules now that are quite good about the collection of the minimum amount of data necessary to provide services. And they've actually gone through for things like mobile app types, mapping, navigation, whatever, and said, what is the necessary data for this service? And if they need to collect beyond, if they want to collect beyond that, they have to get specific individual consent for each item. Beyond that, and they can't deny you access to basic services due to your refusal of non-necessary information. So like, that's quite good. Of course, you'll notice that it speaks to other commercial entities and other civil entities, citizens and companies, not to the government. The government does have some rules about its use of your information, but ultimately, when you get through it, it relies on internal checks and good faith of the government actors. And being a criminal procedure person, I know that should the police decide they're investigating a criminal case, they have very good access to anything they need. The question is, what happens to that information? Is it only going to be in the police for the purpose of this investigation and destroyed afterwards? Is it something that could be hacked and shared inappropriately? And DNA privacy is a thing that they've recently gone into, where there's rules for people collecting and getting approval to collect DNA for research and commercial purposes, but also talk of the government doing surveys of national DNA, including, important gene families and unique traits.
Wow.
So I recently learned the term genomic sovereignty, and I won't say much about it because I don't want to talk outside of my expertise, but basically it's not just China that's done this. And the general idea of it is that to stop sort of foreign colonial exploitation of what is a natural resource, governments have made rules about genomic sovereignty, saying that we have to be included in the profit, both financial and scientific, of any research being done on our DNA, our people's DNA.
Interesting.
I mean, if you think about it, big pharma would travel to countries and where there's less regulation to develop a gene pool for things like mapping. I mean, it gets into all sorts of questions of should anyone own that data at all? Should you own your DNA, or is it just the thing the nature? It's not as straightforward an issue. It certainly sounds as dystopian as it can get. But you can understand also the impetus for it. Of course, once you do a survey of DNA, we get into those issues about who has access to this data. Is my name linked to my personal genome? Because then you have discrimination issues. There's many, many questions about what that means and how it will play out. But China, in terms of defamation law and that kind of protection, they're quite strict. It's when you're going against another citizen, you have a lot of rights to protect your information, to stop other people's speech about you. When it's against the government, less so.
Naturally. So what are you currently working on then?
I've been doing a lot of work on juvenile stuff because of these new laws that have just come out. They've really created a new body of law
Okay.
about minors, which was sorely needed, both because China, the rapid urbanization has led some minors to move to big cities in search of opportunities, just like their parents have done. Others are left behind unprotected in villages when their parents go looking for work. Rules on guardianship, child abuse, domestic violence,
Yeah.
making compulsory education for 9 years a reality for more kids. So all of this, addressing juvenile crime, all of these are real issues, and some of the reforms are going in a great direction, others aren't, which is sort of par for the course in law on juveniles anywhere.
Yeah.
But the content information protections are one aspect of that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, it sounds like there's plenty of things to keep you busy then.
There's so much that the Chinese law changes so quickly. And it's not radical, confusing changes. It's just new developments constantly. The good news is they do publish lots of it these days, and they make it available for public comment as well. And we try on the website to translate some of that even. So sometimes people outside the country make comments on laws that will impact other nations and human rights that everyone's concerned about. But it is more transparent, which is good. But no one knows what happens to those suggestions that are submitted on laws. So I mean, they are read. I've known people who in various departments have had the duty of reading them, but they don't often respond to them, one-to-one or anything like that.
Right.
But they do look for trends. Recently a revised draft of the law on the protection of women got people very interested and upset. And you can see the number of comments that have been submitted on each of these laws. And it's just way higher than most laws because a lot of people were offended by the way it went or thought it didn't go far enough. So yeah, I mean, there's always new things. There's always stuff to keep us going.
Yeah, I guess that's, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our goal always is to help these laws get implemented in a positive direction that corresponds to international law standards in the treaties China has ratified. But also, just as lawyers, as member of a global legal community, to point out stuff that we've already tried that didn't work, stuff that we tried that did work. Negative examples are just as valuable as positive, and just to try and functioning legal systems and rule of law everywhere.
Yeah. Well, what's the best way for people to follow you and keep track of your work there?
The website, I put up a lot of things, but it's a little dense and technical for some people. I use Twitter frequently. And you can find me under China Law Translate with an 8 at the end instead of the ATE. And I tend, when there's new legal authority, to do a thread commenting on it. And a lot of corrections of misstatements of Chinese law, which come out frequently. Chinese law matters to people outside of China to an increasing extent. And I think we're at the point now where their legal system is important to enough people that we need to be more nuanced about it. And we need to be thinking about it like a legal system and really looking at the rules to understand what's going on and how they'll be applied in practice.
Sure.
So I'm always trying to be objective in presenting it, and to make sure that some of these misstatements of it don't go unchecked.
Right. Yeah. No, that's important. Yeah. If you want to make sure people are understanding things the right way. So.
Yeah. There's always plenty of reasons to be legitimately upset. If I can minimize being upset about something that is erroneous, then by all means.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really interesting and clearly a lot of stuff going on out there in the world. So
That there is. That there is. Thank you so much for having me, Ben.
All right, I'm going to turn off the recording here, and